Rick, I want to talk with you a little bit about community life and the virtue of loyalty. And I guess as soon as you start talking about loyalty, it suggests to us ways in which we are not faithful to the life of a community. We could relate that to family life, for example. I mean, I suppose one of the things that would be very distasteful is for one spouse to be talking about the other one outside the family circle and putting them down in front of their friends and so on. Or it's often hard to take when youngsters are not loyal to their parents. Where I know situations of single women trying to raise children and teenage boys, and where the boys are not respectful and will tear their mothers down despite their great sacrifices and tremendous efforts to function as a single parent, will tear them down outside the family setting and speak badly about them. And that's very hurtful, I think. I suppose we could see it within parish communities, too, where people would not be loyal to the well-being of the parish. They would maybe quit going there when times are tough, or fail to speak up to try to help the pastor to do a better job. I mean, we can probably think of a lot of examples where people are disloyal to the communities they belong to.
And it also is sometimes hard to tell, at least I find, which I'm doing, whether I'm trying to tell the truth about in a way that's helping me be constructive, helping us as a group be constructive, and when am I saying something that's actually undermining that community or that body. It's just so difficult. And I come again from a background that where not much was said at all, and I think I've often now erred on the side of saying some things that perhaps shouldn't be said, in sort of overcompensating for the silence that was there for a long time.
Yeah, there is a tension that you're describing. There is in between being honest, forthright, speaking the truth, and a loyalty to the various groups, communities that we belong to. I suppose church people often find that these days. I mean, some people who are very critical of the church, for example, often say, well, they do it out of loyalty. It's because I am loyal to the church's highest ideals, loyal to the gospel and to the message of Christ, that therefore I must speak critically about the church. So that's a line that one will often hear these days, and it represents that same sort of conflict that you brought up. I suppose if you see sort of a tension between truth-telling and loyalty, it creates a self-examination, I would think.
Yes.
That is, everybody would have to say, where do I tend to err along this line? Am I so loyal that I would never speak the truth about the organization or the community, or am I so loose from the organization that my criticism becomes harsh and really is not constructive? So there is a tension, I think, that people would recognize. And it's true. I mean, some people, I've done in marriage counseling, sometimes I will talk to one of the spouses who says, they're having a lot of trouble. It's been horrible abuse and all of this, and I've never told anyone. I never wanted to tell anyone. I was afraid to tell anyone.
Yes.
I was afraid I was being unloving or disloyal to my spouse if I told anyone. So you really do see that, and where I'm sitting there saying, well, true loyalty would have said, tell somebody, get yourself out of the situation. So again, that would be an example, it seems to me, where the conflict you raise would be very real, possible to make a mistake.
And again, it's such an important issue or question that it's impossible to pin down. In fact, the people who were part of this would probably need to be part of that discussion to determine in what places have I said something about my family or my wife in a way that really was inappropriate, and where was it actually helpful in helping me find out that other men struggle with that same sort of thing, and we're trying to be more loyal to our spouses in that discussion. So again, it's so hard to pin down, but it's important to to talk about that issue of
I suppose it translates into the business world too, or the economic world, where people talk about loyalty to the company, loyalty to the corporation, or to the agency that they work for, and so on. And there, I don't know that the stakes seem quite as high as in family life or in parish church life, but I think the same dynamics are at work. I mean, you look at other cultures, they talk about the Japanese having great loyalty to their company, for example, and company having great fidelity and caring for them. I suppose in the United States, with so much mobility and movement and so on, the question gets blurred a bit. But I do think that there is a certain loyalty along this line that would be a proper Christian virtue.
What would be the opposite of, if we're talking often about truth, and what would be if loyalty is one side of an important truth, I wonder what the other side is. Is it telling the truth?
Well, I mean, that's the way, one way it plays off in my mind, at least, truth-telling versus loyalty. I mean, if you take the common example of the church these days, I mean, the critics of the church will say, well, I must be truthful about what I see. If I think leadership is not functioning like the servants that they're supposed to be according to the gospel, that they're not living up to gospel ideals, I must tell this truth. And other people looking at it will say, well, yeah, but they're disloyal. They're hurting the thing. So, I mean, that is one way to play it off. I mean, loyalty versus truth-telling. I mean, I'm sure there's other ways to look at it also.
And in light of some of the earlier talks we've done, that's the great conversation that needs to be taking place. And both sides need to be heard, and the dialogue needs to continue.
Yes, I think that's right, and the personal search needs to continue as well. That's a great examination of conscience. Does my sense of loyalty sort of supersede any truth-telling, so that I am a company person? I simply do what is expected, and therefore I don't make any constructive contribution to the improvement of the organization, the group, the parish, the family. That would be a way of testing it. I think if we were looking at, what are the criteria, one is, am I producing a better situation by my criticism? Am I somehow helping the group to grow or develop, become more faithful to their ideals? I mean, think of university life these days. I mean, we got all kinds of reports criticizing undergraduate education, for example, and criticizing the lack of community on campuses, things like that. And so we asked the question, well, are those helpful or not? Well, if they lead to reform, one would say, yes, I mean, they're doing good. We presume goodwill on the part of these people. They're trying to tell us how it really is in the university. They might not get it exactly right. They might have the nuance wrong and so on. But that's their goal, to say how it is for a reason, so that the university can reform, improve, do a better job of teaching undergraduates, doing its research, and contributing to the life of the community. So I would set that up as a criterion. I mean, somebody's in a parish. I mean, should they criticize the pastor or not? Well, I mean, it would seem as though there's sort of a Christian way of going about that one ought to go to the pastor first, and if you have a criticism and you don't like his homilies, or you don't like the way he's running the parish, there's a proper Christian way that says, well, you go to the pastor, sort of privately maybe, and say, well, Father, what about this? I'm not sure I go along with this, or could we talk about this? I mean, but there also could be prudential ways in which one would find that to be ineffective, and then would gather with other folks so that one could make a stronger case. And as I talk like that, I'm reminded of the interventions that we see for alcoholics and families. I mean, maybe the wife goes to the husband who's an alcoholic and tries to get him to do something about it, but he won't do it, and then they plan this intervention. So you get all the family together, and you have a lot of truth-telling. Everyone says, here's what's happening. This isn't working right. You've hurt us this way, or I've been hurt this way. I guess that's how you do it. This has happened to me. This has happened to... And we go around the room, and we try to get the person with the alcoholic problem here to see it, to be just sort of bombarded with the truth, so that they have to do something about it. Well, there would be sort of prudential ways of telling the truth that are designed to create a better situation and improve community life. So that this the question of loyalty here is a really key. I borrow a lot of my ideas from the American idealist philosopher Josiah Royce. He died in 1916, just to locate him a little bit. But he wrote a lot about community, and his key idea was loyalty. Said that we have to have loyalty to the community. It's what gives us sort of a long-term concern for it. We got to be faithful to the highest ideals of the community life. He wanted what he called a thoroughgoing devotion to persons and to the common good. And of course he thought that the largest community we belong to is the whole human family.
Yes.
So there's first of all a loyalty to the whole human family, and that gives a large perspective to look at things. I mean, if we were loyal to the whole human family, we would probably say, well, I don't want to mess up the environment here in the United States because that's going to hurt other people somehow. And then he begins to talk about loyalty to smaller groups as well.
I think this is why in some of the earlier discussions we've had about Scott Peck and the work he's been doing with community building and peacemaking, there's been actually more businesses have been going to his organization. It's a foundation called the the Foundation for Community Encouragement. It's a
Scott Peck, the author, psychologist. Right. People know him from The Road Less Traveled and his other book on community life, A Different Drum.
A Different Drum. Yeah. And he's been doing workshops using a community building process, which he thought would be most quickly and most appealing to church communities, but he's found the business community has actually been more interested than churches have. And many businesses have been coming and asking, and governmental organizations too, to have him come in and gather people, up to 50, 60 people sometimes, to actually build community first in order to have both an atmosphere in which people can tell the truth of what they're really thinking and feeling, but also to build loyalty so that as they begin to work with problems or try to make some decisions, they'll be doing it with a deep sense of respect for one another and for this body as a whole.
So the business world is picking this up, and the reason, of course, is self-interest, because they know if the employees have this greater sense of community and develop some of this loyalty that we're talking about, that the whole operation's going to work better. They're going to be more productive and happier workers, people more engaged and involved are going to do a better job for the company. Much
more creative and a lot less yes people around, and they know they need that kind of the insights of their best people in order to be competitive in the
So the community setting really would release creativity.
Yes.
Now that's an important idea there.
Yes.
That they want to foster that so we don't get groupthink, so everyone is doing it the same way, because then the company won't evolve and improve.
Right. Yeah.
As you suggested, a lot of that should go for church life too. I mean, we can think of ways of applying that to parishes, can't we?
There's I'm going to stay with the business side it for
go
a
ahead,
second,
sure.
But there is a lot of emphasis on creativity and on the synergy that comes from people being together, having the differences or the conflict or whatever it is, their ideas out on the table, and for those to be to bounce off of each other and to have something far beyond what they originally thought at the beginning. In fact, far beyond perhaps the best ideas that were put forward at the beginning.
So if we have loyalty in a community, we're going to be able to argue with one another. We're going to get out differences because we all have a loyalty maybe to a higher ideal, to what the community's supposed to be, whether it's a business or a parish or a family. We're loyal to those higher ideals, therefore we're willing to say, well, we got differences here. We have to discuss them, and we might argue about them, but we're doing so confident that there's a richer mix that comes out of this, that there's new life that emerges from this deeper sharing.
And if they actually build community first before they go to any other task, they fight more gracefully. I mean, that's what they actually have used those words. We find that we fight much more gracefully. And then they tend to shift towards a consensus in their decision-making process rather than sort of voting or One group of doctors in a clinic spent about 2 hours after they had come to a sense of community together in coming up with a definition of consensus. That was their first task after creating community. And they came up with this. It's consensus is a group decision in which some members may not feel is the best decision, but which they feel they all can live with, support, and commit themselves to not undermine. It's arrived at without voting through a process whereby the issues are fully aired, that all members feel they have been adequately heard, that everyone has equal power and responsibility, and that different degrees of influence by virtue of their individual stubbornness or charisma are avoided, so that all are satisfied with the process.
So we're talking about the loyalty now to the decisions that the group has arrived at, even though we might not all agree with it. And of course in the United States we have a sense of this. While it wouldn't be always consensus decision making, we would have the notion of democracy and the minority needing to go along with the majority. And of course we've had a unique history along that line. There becomes a loyalty to the whole project. I mean, we'll often see that happen where people in the opposition party say we have only one president. Or if there is a foreign policy decision, we'll find people often backing it. Now, I think that can go too far. I mean, maybe we get a foreign policy decision where it ought to be criticized and we get too much loyalty. And I think historically people would claim that has happened. Some would say that happened early on in the Vietnam War where there was not enough criticism mounted. But anyway, the part of what you're talking about there is that loyalty and community means we have loyalty and fidelity to the decisions that have been arrived at. I suppose you could see that in family life too, couldn't you? I mean, the family decides that we go to church on Sunday morning, and therefore the people, the other members of the community, need to sort of go along with that. I mean, they might not feel like going this Sunday morning, but maybe their loyalty to the ideals of the community and the general direction of this family say, well, I go anyway because I'm a better example that way, or because this is the right thing to do. I'm loyal to the highest ideals. So that's I think that's a good point to keep in mind about, it's always a question of what are we loyal to. I suppose a lot of times we think of loyalty is in terms of persons, isn't it? I'm loyal to people because I respect them, because I'm obliged to respond to them, because I have responsibilities for them, because I got blood ties, or I made decisions to work with them, and so on. So maybe part of thinking of loyalty is in terms of persons.
And when you create that a community with that loyalty and have moved towards a consensus approach for decision making, there is a willingness to even allow one person to block a decision. And there's a tremendous trust that takes place then. It puts a lot of pressure on that person that's willing to take that stand, but it's somebody saying, I can't live with this decision, and to have that group be willing to continue the struggle until the person can begin to live with it, or something gets altered in a way that we then have consensus. And again, it says it doesn't have to be necessarily be the decision that they all feel or we all feel is the best decision, but one we can live with and we can commit ourselves to not to undermine.
Not to undermine, yeah. Yes. Even if I'm not terribly enthusiastic about it, at least I won't tear it down or sort of subtly subvert it in various ways. And I think that's what happens often in the business world, doesn't it? I mean, people will drag their heels. They won't really get into it. They will, in one way or another, subvert the whole project. And I think to apply that to the church again, we can see the same thing happening. Excuse me. I think we often have a situation where people don't like a particular direction the parish is going in, and therefore they find their ways to undermine it. They won't. They will speak against it. They will, in one way or another, let other people know they don't like it. They won't support it actively, and so on. And then I think this does hurt the life of the whole community. Again, as we talk like that, though, about loyalty, we're on one side of the equation, aren't we? Because there's always that other side of necessarily being critical and not getting involved in groupthink. I mean, that's a danger. You got 5 people sitting around a room making a decision, 4 are passionate about a thing, and somebody's sitting there saying, no, I don't like this. This won't work. This doesn't seem right. I've been in groups like that and where it's very hard to express the opposition. You almost feel as though you're being disloyal or that you're not going along with the team effort here. And yet I think we probably perform a better service to the community by speaking out those fears or doubts or objections so that other people can wrestle with them and maybe we come to a better consensus point.
And there's often the fear, like for me, of no longer being in the, quote, inner circle, that somehow suddenly not carrying much credibility if I were to speak out on some particular issue when there seems to be the whole rest of the group willing to go along with a particular direction that has been set.
Right. That's a very natural feeling, I think, and I think that it keeps many people from loyally criticizing.
Yes.
So maybe what we're looking for is a critical loyalty. We can't have just a loyalty that does it for the sake of loyalty, but that we need a critical sense about it. And again, I think it probably only works if you have a larger perspective, and the kind of perspective that I would bring from the world of faith that says that God is trying to gather the human community. You know, and for us Christians, we say that's what Jesus was about. He was a community builder. He was trying to break down the barriers and get the people involved in the project, the overall project to create the kingdom. And he sort of demanded loyalty, but the loyalty was to the highest ideals. Loyalty to the best of what the community is supposed to be about. And maybe I think many people look at the church situation that way these days. They say, well, my loyalty is really to Christ. My loyalty is to God. That's who I have to be faithful to. I answer to God someday. If you want to extend it to the church, maybe we'd say, well, I'm loyal to the highest ideals of the church, or I'm loyal to the best of the tradition in the church. But that doesn't mean one couldn't be critical of particular policies or of certain directions the church is taking at any point in history.
And it actually allows us to engage in conflict. If what you're loyal to is a larger context, it's saying that this conflict can ultimately be trusted. That as we engage in this conflict and feel we're sort of at impasse, we still know that that's when God's that's that sort of teachable moment that God has for us. That oftentimes the great insights come at those moments when we actually give up. We actually let go. We've been holding on, and now we're letting go. And in that emptiness, in that despair, somehow we're given some word, some insight that reconciles the thing that looked irreconcilable on the surface.
Yes, I would relate that to loyalty to Jesus Christ, because Christ epitomizes that. That was part of his teaching, that the seed must die, go into the ground if it's going to sprout. You have the whole paradox of you must take up your cross and follow me if you are to have life. You have to die to self if you're going to achieve a richer life. All of that paradoxical statement is so much a part of the teaching of Jesus, not only his teaching, but his very lifestyle of finally going to the cross obediently. Father, into your hands I commend my spirit, and finding in the midst of that what we call resurrection, the validation of his whole life and vindication of his teaching and so on. So there you find that if we are loyal to Christ, we're loyal to a process.
Yes.
Loyal to a process of death and resurrection.
In fact, loyal to being in that conflict, being willing to be in that conflict.
You know, my teacher, Karl Rahner, often said that the essence of sin is to escape from reality, to move out of reality, and to not live in the structure of the world, the way it's really set up. And you can just see that so clearly. If one is going to deny the cross, deny the self-sacrifice, deny the discipline, then one can't expect the fruits, the life, the richer existence, the successes, and the deeper satisfactions. They must go together. That's the rule of life. That's the kind of reality God has set up for us. So loyalty to Christ then becomes loyalty to reality.
Yes.
You're faithful to the reality of the world, or to the realness of it all, to the very structure that God has put into it.
And
I think. Go ahead.
And to the pluralism that's there. I mean, that's the reality we're becoming so aware of now, and that to try to obliterate that pluralism sort of has been part of our human history, and we've discovered that the kingdom isn't coming for doing that, and it's making us have a sense of something that God's plan must be much larger and maybe quite different than we ever imagined. The gathering of God's people, and who are God's people, is much larger than we had envisioned in the past.
That's one of the values of speaking about this virtue of loyalty and community, because it does broaden your perspective, because it forces you to ask, what are you loyal to? That's what happens. And so if you are loyal to some very narrow, nationalistic, or exclusive cause, then you miss a lot of what it's all about. It forces you to say, what am I loyal to? Finally, I'm loyal to God.
Yes.
And I'm loyal to the whole of the human community. It seems to me that's the direction it takes you in.
Yeah, and ultimately, it's are we even loyal to our own concept of God, or if we really engage in this truth-seeking and the paradox and the conflict that arises as we try to work through these issues in a pluralistic world, what is exciting to me is we often have to let go and finally let God be God.
That's well said, Rick, and brings us near the end of this whole discussion. So we've been talking about community and loyalty, and trying to broaden out our sense of that, and suggesting that our loyalty is to God, and a God who remains always mysterious to us. And then that loyalty leads us to what we call a critical loyalty in relationship to family, to the work site, and to the church. And it's in that way that we make our contribution to helping the community grow.